What's going on, you loyal listeners? Thank you for tuning in to the L Squared podcast. I'm your host here, Luke Larson. We are L Squared elsewhere on location here in Aberdeen, South Dakota for the South Dakota Film Festival. We are the official podcast of the South Dakota Film Festival, and again, we're not sure if we're allowed to say that. Here with me, as per the usual, my lovely and loquacious co-host, Old Legs.
Hello, welcome.
And we have a very special guest here, the star of the new film Violet's New Life, the lovely Christina Hepburn. Woo!
Welcome.
Yeah, hi.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
I was Instagramming the that we're doing our interview right now.
Nice.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. We saw your film last night, and we loved it.
Thank you.
Good. We got to meet over the weekend, and I just want to say up top that I'm glad we met. You're a very lovely person, and
I'm glad we met too.
And it's the film brings up a lot of interesting ideas, and we're excited to talk about that. But could you kind of give us the synopsis of Violet's New Life?
Yeah, I believe the actual log line of it is just what if you could. Oh no, now I'm getting it wrong. No, what if you could live again, basically? Yeah. What if you could start your life over?
Right.
And so I think that's really at the crux of it is just, everybody always talks about kind of these second chances. And currently in our culture, there's a lot of people investing money and trying to live forever. Mm. Maybe that's the tagline. What if you could live forever? but
it's somewhere in there.
Yeah, it's one of those. Yeah,
it sounds right.
Late night IMDb reading last night. Right. Yeah, I'm like, oh yeah, there it is. Yep. But
and so it's just that idea of all these people are putting money into it currently. Corporations like Google are putting money into it, trying to get people or allow people to live forever.
Yeah.
So it's weird to think it's not just a fun movie idea anymore. It's
it's turning less from science fiction and more into
having heard you brought this up last night at the Q&A, I did some reading and talk about a rabbit hole of going down.
Yes, totally. You'll be there all night on the web.
It's really interesting because I'm starting to oh my gosh, what's the motivation for these huge tech companies doing it? And it almost seems like it's this kind of egotistical thing where it's all these guys got super, super rich in their 20s and now maybe they're going through this midlife crisis and they're the next thing, I want to live forever, so...
Oh my god, you just nailed it. That's how I feel about it, too. Yeah, and they're I don't want to age. And
right,
you're just kind of why? What are you afraid of?
Yeah, so...
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think I tend to be a little more, interested in, the beauty of, the cycle of life and what you learn in every chapter, right? Rather than trying to create, stasis and be I'm not maturing.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I don't know.
Well, before we dive off the deep end here, we'll just say that we're going to go into spoilers about the film.
Yeah.
And we're going to give away plot points, because otherwise it's hard to really get in the weeds I think I for sure want to. So, kind of the plot of this is you play a character, Violet, who gets a new life. Mm-hmm. Because it wasn't super clear in the film, but did she die?
Good question.
Maybe try and explain to us the process of how this whole thing works. I know a lot of it is kind of left up to the viewer's imagination, but just kind of maybe your take on it of how you start from here we go. There's this pamphlet of I can live again,
live forever. Yeah. So the concept is that I guess the scientific goal or the medical practice would be to transplant your consciousness into a robotics, a body that doesn't age. I mean, that said, it could even be made from stem cells, right? I mean, these days we're growing organs and stuff, right? So let's imagine we create another human body, but it's kind of cloned. and then you're able to actually take the mind and put it in, right? Like the idea is that you can actually go with all of your memories and your life experience and all your knowledge and start again in the updated, younger, non-ailing body. It's funny because if it was a cloning, then your body would age. But if it was if it was robotics, then your body would stay.
Sure.
Right. Would stay that age forever. Whereas, actually, it would probably be an incentive for the technology companies to let your body age, so that every
it's like getting a new iPhone. You have to get a new model.
So 50 years, you have to do it again.
Yeah, we were kind of running through this, the pros and cons, and obviously we asked each other would you do it? And I was thinking gosh, how does this work? Is it a subscription model, or are you paying month to month? What if you lose your debit card and you forget to, you forget to renew it, and all of a sudden you just
you turn off.
The worst case of forgetting
to.
And then
maybe it would encourage more loving relationships, because if you could just short circuit like that, you need your partners to resuscitate you.
No, they were on a call line. They're calling IT. It's
how much do they like you?
Did you turn it on and turn it back off again?
Yeah, well, I want to say, so something about the film, I think the concept of it was also, the idea that you're, so yes, the transplanting the consciousness, but it's what would every day look like? The everyday life of it, right? So most films are kind of the sci-fi thriller or the horror or the devastation and the end of the world coming, and this one's no, in 10 years, we're going to be able to transplant consciousness, and, it's going to be the VCR became a CD. And then we're going to be living amongst each other, and how does that look? And so there's a lot of comedy in there, or that's the intention of this project, is to show the humor and show the awkwardness, and
definitely.
Yeah.
I was kind of wondering too there is definitely a duality with this project as far as kind of blending comedy with high drama, high sci-fi. It gets it's a little uncomfortable towards the end, and I think that's intentional. So how do you go about kind of blending all of those different themes into one kind of cohesive?
Yeah, good question. My honest thought was in editing. I feel there were cuts of it that were broader comedy, and I mean, my personal taste. I come from a comedy background, and I was hysterical. I love it, and Santana Dempsey, who's my co-star. I think she was just I don't know, it's a little much, and then finally there was a cut that
middle ground.
Yeah, that Kim Ray, the director, found exactly this kind of sweet spot blend that's not too broad and still strikes those moments where we are dealing with death, and back to what you. So I kind of almost to skip that question, or I ended up doing, but you were asking so did she die? And I think in the film it's I guess her body, once you take the consciousness out, it's a good question. I guess the heart would still beat.
Right.
So then did they euthanize her body?
Right.
Probably,
and
but she had terminal illness, so she mentions that's what comes up, and you kind of then, I think the idea there too is to empathize more with her journey and why she did it, just what you said, rather than this sort of ego trip. Right. It's what is it to suffer with terminal illness, or to and there's I mean millions, I don't know, is it millions? Lots of people suffering with it in this country and around the world, and that's become a big issue that came up too, which is. The assisted suicides, and I think is it Oregon made it legal, or Washington, one of those states
somewhere out there.
up there in the Pacific Northwest. But so that's a big issue, and it's these people have chronic pain, this kind of thing. So if you're just actually living with that and really suffering, or anyone who knows a family member who's had cancer or something, I think that's where you kind of empathize more with saying why would I want to live that way? And here's this really cool opportunity to do something about it. And I think in her story, Violet's story, she's really, looking at her family and wanting to see them grow and like what's going to happen to them and be there for her children. And so maybe mom's love too, like what is it's mom not wanting to let go.
It's definitely interesting because I think you're right that there's a lot of story to tell here, just the kind of banal day-to-day, what happens tomorrow, like you said, with her kids, like, oh, hey, it's mom, like,
yeah.
So, that's super interesting.
Yeah, and I was just thinking that if she's in a synthetic body, right, it wouldn't probably be her gray matter physical brain that's in there, right? They would have some kind of a motherboard to
oh my god, I just got like goosebumps from you saying that. I was like, so like, can she even make new memories?
Right.
Or is it like she's stuck that way and she can't actually grow the way like life experience allows us to grow, right? And maybe like the way that I'm not the same as I was a few years ago. Right. People love to go, oh, you're not, you don't change. And I'm like, you don't, like there's certain like core essence truths, but like life experience changes you. Like I don't. Well, we'll see. But like, I kind of like went through this phase where I was like I was doing like stand up hardcore, like at the club, like every other night, and doing the open mics and rehearsing and with friends with all the comedians, and then like, a life shift happened, and I thought, oh, maybe this isn't the direction I need to go in, and then I became a professional cuddler. And I actually do that a lot, and I've done like a lot of press around it, and it's sort of like become this like new mission to talk about like the value of touch in our culture.
Like touch therapy?
Yes. Yeah. And like, that's life, like diverging and happening and making decisions based on experience and trauma moments and like I mean, I kind of cut you off. But
no, I'm just excited because I was just going to say you're touching on one of the main, maybe only theme that's been consistent over the last few years in this podcast. We talk about Manchester by the Sea constantly. That film
seems to always come up.
Always comes up.
So it haunts you.
Yeah, a little bit.
Struck a chord in the heart.
Because incremental change, like we think that's what that movie's all about, is incremental change, and how it's not realistic to just overnight flip the script and be a completely different person. It's about those tiny little incremental changes that we go through.
There's a song by Frank Turner called Little Changes. He's like, little changes.
That's because the whole time you're like, so that film, like you're wanting at the end for him to just turn it around and to be fixed, but it's not how life is, and it's So
and even like aging, right? Like we don't age overnight. It is a slow process. Like I feel like I remember like I don't know if it couldn't have been college, maybe like right after college. I was like, wait, is that like a slight wrinkle line at my on my eyes when I smile? I was like, weird, like that was never there before. But so subtle, right? And I feel like I talk to my grandmother, and my grandmother's like, poof, I still feel 25. I mean, except the body's slowing down.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Actually, I feel like that like brought us back to why people do it. You're like, you still feel young, and then you look in the mirror and you're like, what's happening to my body?
Because I've always felt, and I still feel like older than I am. I feel like I'm 40, 35, 40 on the inside. So I'm like, in my head, I'm like, if I were to do it, I would want a synthetic body that would probably match that.
At 30, like you want to stay at that age range. Yeah, like, well, that's kind of what the show is, right? Like she doesn't come back to being 19. Right. She's like at this kind of mature area where like you kind of get to live for yourself, and maybe you've established yourself a little bit, but you're also not.
So can I put you on the spot and ask what age you would come back as if you were able to do this?
Oh gosh. Well, that's what's interesting is like I haven't lived the later years yet, and it's like maybe those are better. And you even read like books where women and men. Well, I don't know about men. I'm thinking of some women who say like that kind of as they get older, like they're really happy, like they're more comfortable in their bodies, like they feel less insecure, and they like they feel more confident about who they are, and they kind of like trust the way the world is working, right? Like you don't have as much anxiety. I feel like that is happening. I'm like slowly turning that corner in life where you're like, oh, like I don't know what I was so worked
Yeah,
up
no,
about.
it's
I'm
not
gonna
so
chill.
bad.
Yeah, I'm just gonna sip my coffee on the porch. Like, everything's fine. Just less about like ambition or, that you
Right.
have to be someone to have value, right? Like,
Mhm.
I'm like, nah, my value's good. like my heart's beating.
Because it's really, at the end of the day, you realize it's your value is the value you give yourself. It's about self-love.
Yeah.
And you realize all the love you ever need or could want, you have in yourself. So it really has to come from you to set your own value. And
Yeah.
if you put that on other people, it's not going to work out. You'll never get that fulfillment.
Right. Well, I think also kind of, yes, it's like it starts with the self-love. And then I think with that is, how do you, what do I want to say? Like, again, kind of like the interdependence of like your community and relationships, right? Like the happiness comes from like, oh, I'm going to like give and support this person, in these little ways or whatever, whatever it is. And then like how that creates this feedback loop of like affection and care and support and I don't know, anyway. I mean, I feel like even doing this podcast is like, like that exchange of like appreciation.
Sure. Yeah, I think you're totally right, or you're onto something with that feedback loop, because I think, especially how it relates to the film, an integral part of her coming back.
Film. Thank you.
It's like we've done this.
Yeah, it's like we should be better at.
No, I'm kidding. Go ahead. So what was the thought?
Where this feedback loop that you're talking about, where she comes back, but and she is back, but she's also still relying on the people around her to believe in her existence, I guess. Because it's I was like thinking, again, this is like a late night thought, but is her knowing that she exists good enough, or does she rely on the other people around her to, does this work in a vacuum, or does it rely on the people to kind of have that back and forth, or is that?
No, I love that you're saying that, because in a way there's also this like vanity project of the funeral, or I don't know if
Big
or like how
time,
she's,
right.
because in the story, in the story you see how she's really kind of controlling a little bit, and like, and I think it's done in a comedic way, like kind of, maybe a little like, oh, she's a little neurotic about, this and that, and they're like her friends, but she's trying to kind of curate the perfect experience, and maybe that's even kind of a story thread that would continue. It's a film, but it was conceived as like a series to have like this ongoing narrative about her life journey.
Definitely.
Yeah, and so I think maybe there you're hitting on some of the themes that would come up, like, she started again, but has she learned anything? What is the life lesson? And it's like, oh, well, I'm trying to curate this perfect experience, and I finally have this chance to start again, so I'm going to do it, quote, right this time. But like, what is right? It's like, oh, okay, like you're thinner and you're, I don't know what, that's it. Like, you're just like, you're thinner, so now you think like things are going to be better. And it's like, that's not,
it's hard,
that's like a product idea sold to us, right? That there are plenty of unhappy thin people,
it's
or
hard
unhappy skinny people.
As an outsider looking in, or a viewer watching the movie, you totally see the flaw in this logic. But I still feel like anyone who would be doing this would totally sign up for, I want to be thin and tall. If I hadn't just met you, like maybe 20 minutes before we saw the movie, I probably would have thought you were like 6'3".
Oh, really? Oh, because of the movie. That's what everyone keeps talking about, how I seemed so tall in the film.
Yeah,
well, so again, my co-star Santana is like, I don't want to offend her by guessing her height wrong. No, she's probably, she's probably 5'3", 5'4". I mean, also there's lots of small actors. I feel like actors. Anyway, but I'm trying to think of like sort of famous people I've met where I'm like, wow, you're really small.
Right? I mean, it feels like you definitely got the Tom Cruise treatment. Where
Very much.
Low angle. It was like always tall. Well, I was
Everybody
wearing
else
like
is
3-inch heels in it,
Yep.
and my co-star. Well, I think my co-star had heels on too, but so she's 5'3", she's already like 4 inches shorter than me, and then I have the heels, so that did make me
It worked good. It worked good as a kind of a good dynamic between you two. So
yeah, maybe a little bit. Yeah, like it kind of enhances the relationship.
Right.
Like who's in charge. Do we say too much? I'm like, spoiler alert. I won't give it away.
Yes.
I love the ending of the film. What you just said, that it's awkward, and I think it very intentionally is like, is there attraction going on? Like,
big time.
Like sort of this Oedipal thing.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a little slight giveaway.
I thought we were like, oh my gosh, this is like an episode of Black Mirror that's starting. But yeah, I think you're totally right. Where there's like many different stories that you could just kind of keep going.
Right. So did it? So, okay, that's interesting. Like, so was your experience of it like, okay, you're like laughing and going along, and then there's like a sad moment, but then the way it ends is like, ah!
Yeah, 100%. So,
like, oh God, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, and some of it was like, was that, you're never sure how much of it was intentional.
Well, we don't give you any, like, we don't give you anything after that, so you're just sitting. Well, what I found interesting about it is that then you are sitting with your own maybe internal like soap opera kind of like, where does your mind go with it?
Right.
I mean, my mind totally went in the Oedipal direction, and and then I also kind of loved it and was like I don't know what that says about me.
I think it's great. I think it was a really great way to end it, because
yeah, I think it's like maybe what I like so much about it is that it's actually like transgressive and like taboo and pushing boundaries. And like I had a podcast that was originally called like Pushing Boundaries with TNA. Anyway, and one, I remember we had this one guest on the show who talked about this was actually about people. She like had a PhD, but her research was in like sex parties and why people do group sex. And it was like, and she started talking about like transgression and like just how the human state like seems to want to transgress. Like she was basically like, every case study that I followed, she like, maybe it was like a relationship, like a monogamous couple, and then they said, hey, we want to open the relationship, or we want to go have these experiences, but here are the rules. And then she was like, and everyone would break the rule like in some way, like it didn't matter. And I was like, that just blew my mind and really shifted like maybe even my own perspective on the world, and also like my expectations of relationships, right? Like,
in what way?
Transgression happens, right? So we set rules with people thinking like, hey, this is my rule, and like if you love me, or if you care, or if you're like a responsible adult, you're gonna follow that rule. And that's how I feel safe, and that's how I know that this is safe and we can trust each other.
Right, yeah.
And what I'm learning is what if your expectation is like, this rule is my ideal, and I'm coping with like holding that emotion, like this is what I would like, and these are my fears. And we can imagine that the transgression can occur, or like that this rule is going to break, and maybe we even want to talk about how we would handle that.
Right.
Oh my God. I just had like a thought too, which is like, like current models of divorce, right, in America are like, hey, let's do a prenup for when we'll, and people say it's like, oh, that's dark, because you're basically saying like when it ends or if it ends, like this is how we'll pull things apart. But like, what about a place where you could say like, maybe this is naive of me, but I'm like, rather than like troubleshooting the how do you pull stuff apart, what about troubleshooting like, how do we heal from it? Right? Like, hey, like this is where I don't want to go past this cliff, but like what if you do? And then like, how do we grow and heal from it to continue together?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's very like forward thinking. I'm like, let's jump like 10 steps forward after the person cheats.
I would love, that's a really interesting point to like, to hear. I'm sure that was a really interesting conversation with you, talking about like that set of rules, and how people, like, the rules are extremely important because the transgression is like part of it.
Yeah, like that was great.
Part,
what you just said. It's like it's like building it into the story.
You need the rules, and then to have them be broken is like the important part.
Yeah, like if we put more,
or what she kind of broadly understood about just this.
Is that
right,
it's
well,
going to happen? It's inevitable,
right?
Yeah, that we can't control what's going to happen, and we like kind of go, okay, like this is the framework, and this is how I know, that everything's safe, and it's like, yeah, but like life isn't safe. Like, like curveballs happen all the time. Like I ended up like in the ER a few years ago, like lost so much blood, right? And it was like, I was like, I didn't know that was going to happen. You know what I mean? Like, and it was like nothing was wrong, obvious, in an obvious way. Yeah. Where was I going with that? I shared it kind of in a like truth telling moment to just be like, like crazy things happen. Mm-hmm. That's,
I feel like when you said, going 10 steps ahead, I feel like one of the things that would help with, if you talked about transgressions of how you deal with it, I feel like that would give you a huge jump start on empathy when it happens.
Yeah.
Because if you talk about it first, then you'll immediately see each other's sides or what you perceive your sides would be in the future. And then when it happens, it's not, you already have that in place, almost like a whatever to put it in, to think like this was their mindset or this is kind of how they process certain things. And it's not, doesn't make it right or wrong, but it helps you empathize with their plight to be able to.
I'm going to plug a little. Yeah. I'm going to plug a little like, I don't know what they even call themselves, like a therapy like workshop group called the Honesty Lab, and they practice something called radical honesty. And they're like, in my opinion, it's kind of like communication exercises, but like communication practices, so that like when conflict comes up, like you feel safe expressing your emotions. So rather than focusing on the transgressive act, and you're like, well, how could you like do that thing that you weren't supposed to do? And that can show up in a lot of ways, or it's not just, oh, I made out with this person or something, or I had sex with someone else, but like I transgress, and then it's like, okay, like here are the communication tools to like unpack the conflict, like why I did it and where it was coming from, and like the story I had in my own head about why I needed to do it. And then the other person's able to like say, well, I'm mad at you because I imagine that means you don't care about me. And then you're able to just tap into your fears. Yeah. And then be like, oh my God, like now we can hold each other and cry. And be like, we're all afraid, in different ways eventually.
I mean, it's not easy to do because from my viewpoint, I think you have to have conviction and you have to hold yourself accountable to be able to do those things, which isn't easy. But, personally, that's what I always try to do in every kind of relationship or friendship is like,
right, sure.
I hold myself accountable, and when I make mistakes, I admit that I have it, and then that's how you work through it, in my opinion. But there's people that
that's a big part of it, apologizing and building trust again.
Right, and knowing that this transgression was inevitable, it happened,
Well, not necessarily. I feel like now I've like emphasized. Well, I guess that was the thesis. This person was saying it's inevitable, but I guess I don't mean that every transgression will happen, and there is also the value of like I'm having the desire for that transgression. Like, let's stop and talk about it. And I think a lot of people come from a place of, I can't talk about it with my partner. If I even share that I'm having the thought, then I'm going to get in trouble. But like holding that down makes it riskier because then you're carrying that alone. Right. Mm-hmm. But you could have the conversation beforehand, knowing that this PhD person wrote a book about how we yearn to transgress.
Yeah. And I feel like the resistance is what gives that its power. It's like the more you try and resist it and avoid it, the more it's going to build up and get more toxic and worse and worse.
Yeah, and build fear.
I like your point though about establishing that safety net between the right and the wrong, and because most of the time we're not either just right or wrong. It's that gray area somewhere in between, and being able to kind of navigate that tricky.
Yeah, right. Well, and like maybe just my interest lately has been like for like, where does forgiveness happen, or like where does that fit, and how do you, and also maybe that mindset is happening because of the cycle of life I'm in, which is you kind of like live a number of years and do things, and college happens, and you sort of have like the seeds of relationships and new relationships, and they grow, and then there's the damage, and then you're kind of, I'm like revisiting like why that damage happened, and trying to find like healing, and that's sort of part of life and growing older. Yeah.
Definitely. Luke's got a lot on his mind here.
Yep, I do. I'm debating how much I should say on here too.
Well, when you when you were talking about like a free flow conversation, I was like, oh, I love that.
Yeah.
My brain just like.
That's what we do. Yeah. So, I'm just gonna do a little bit of an overshare, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Here we go. So, what I'm thinking about is, so my parents are divorced, and they got divorced when it was halfway through my senior year of high school. So it was tough for a lot of reasons, but I kind of think back to that as like, that was like, I think of my life pre that happening and post that happening. It was a big event, and it was hard because I was old enough to like understand everything that was going on. And during that time, it was like I was just focused on taking care of my mom, making sure she was okay, and getting us through that. But like an interesting thing I think about sometimes is that about a year before that happened, my dad was in, and he cheated on my mom a few times. That's what led to that. But it was about a year before that, he hit a deer on his motorcycle. He wasn't wearing a helmet, going 80, was wearing shorts. And really, so he really should have died when that happened, and really just like messed up his knee, and it really wasn't that bad of an accident, not nearly as bad as it should have been, and I remember when that happened, and it was a weird feeling, but I also think like, well, what if he did die when that happened, like he probably should have, I would probably think of my dad differently.
Like that moment, there was still sort of this, I look up to him.
Yeah, like I didn't want to believe that those things were happening, but I probably knew that was happening. But yeah, at the time, it was like I wanted to look up to him and believe in that. So I feel like that's kind of interesting. But then also at the same time, it's like, well, then why, just because of circumstance, it changes that narrative, And,
of like what you're willing to accept or not.
So it's like there's got to be probably some middle ground between those two things, because in both a year before that and at that time, he was the same person.
Yeah, wait, my brain's firing off a little. You're saying that, did this accident happen and then there was the kind of cheating transgressions?
The cheating had been happening for
a
few years.
Yeah.
And like, I just didn't want to believe it.
Yeah,
sure. And so subconsciously, I think I knew it was happening at the time. So yeah, I don't know, but I'm like, in my head, I'm like, well, it's not like, it shouldn't be like, there shouldn't be that separation in my mind of like, if he would have died, I would have thought this about him, but then now, or like a year after that, I think this about him, whatever,
Right.
But lately, like, honestly, I've had more empathy towards him, just because I think like, I think it's got to be hard to live your life like that and to have to live with those mistakes that happen, and it, maybe, obviously I think it was his fault, not whatever, but I think that, I don't know.
I think, I feel like I spent a lot of time studying this because my parents separated when I was, 6. I think it was 6. It's so funny. It's like parents, like, they don't get to give permission.
And it was like a completely different experience. They're like, son, your mother and I are getting divorced. And I was like flipping through channels, like, oh, cool. Like, all right, that makes sense. Like, you guys don't really like each other, so yeah, that sounds good. Like,
wow. How old were you?
Like college-ish.
Oh wow, yeah, that's pretty. I feel like in college, yeah, you're just like
Yeah,
You're kind of separated from.
It's
Yeah, you're like, I'm living my life
that makes
anyway.
sense. I mean, you guys kind of like don't really have anything in common
Like-
besides, you know,
Like
So
Step Brothers,
funny.
you're like, I probably could have called
yeah,
this.
probably
one.
could have called that one.
Well, I always joke too. I'm like, what? My parents were a success. Like, they were married for like 12 years and like had three kids. Like, good job, guys. Like, the next chapter.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, great at being parents, but you know, not so good at.
Yeah,
married.
but I guess I was interested in. I guess I would say like, you know, on paper, like mom had an affair, you know, like or like there was that person, you know. But it's also like, well, you know, when did it finally get to that point that somebody else entered the picture? So I think there's usually a lot of like emotional blockages and like needs not getting met on both sides. Like it's, you know, and so then you go, okay, well, where's, you know, sometimes that physical representation is maybe supposed to be the like calling card or like that moment of like, okay, we need to work through stuff. And then I find that, I mean, ideally you could get there before that. There's probably lots of little signs that there's like stuff that needs to be worked out. And I think that a lot of us haven't been shown the tools, right? And shown the tools how. And then that's where people like the radical honesty community like have taught me a lot. I came from like a position of having like anger avoidance and like repressing it, and then there'd be like, you know, my partner would be like angry and I'd just be like, whoa, that's inappropriate, like I won't even acknowledge that. It's like you know, and that's so right, it's like we're always the one or the other one, like one person's the blow up, one's the like little turtle, you know. I was like the ostrich in the sand being like, I can't hear you, your volume's too loud, I can't hear. And like and now I actually, I mean, I can't say I'm like perfect, but I've worked on, you know, naming my own anger and pushing back, like, oh, you want to be angry, fine, I'm angry about this, and like that actually being totally acceptable and appropriate, and that cathartic, and like that we're just naming what the emotions are, and that I don't have to censor my thoughts, which comes back to what we were saying, where like a lot of people are like, oh, I can't even talk about it, and it's like, but you better talk about it. You better talk about it.
Yeah, so I think we're in the universe of Violet's world where we're able to go back. I think we'll see a huge spike in remarriages. It's like, all right, we're gonna be reliving, you know, playing the hits. We're back, we're young again.
Right. Well, and I think like in her case, you see, like you were just saying in the scene we talked about at her funeral, like all of her friends are there, and they're sort of the ones that are interested in starting again. Like they're all like, "Wow, it worked."
I love that line that the one. What does he say? He's like, "Oh, I can't wait to die now." Like, you know,
yeah, I know. Yeah, he says like, "Hey, I can't wait to die if I'm, you know, if you look this good." yeah. But you see like all the threads of history with everybody, and so it's like that doesn't go away. You're still contending with it, just in some like revamped body. I mean, maybe that is interesting to, you know, well, just what we said, like, sure, maybe there's certain perks. I think I mentioned, like, in the Q&A at the film festival, like, just about this one thread of a storyline that the director had talked about where she, you know, goes out and kind of, like, parties for the first time in a long time, right? Like, so she's come from being terminally ill and thinking this is the end to, like, oh, my God, I'm, like, alive again. So she's like goes out, goes dancing, drinking, whatever, meets someone, they go home together, and she and he finds out that she's an android and he's angry, he's mad at her and feels really betrayed. And it's like kind of what we were just talking about with like truth telling and like what or omission and like what do you need to tell people, or and I feel like it mirrors, like, you know, we're not being confronted with androids, but you know, all those moments of like like, why didn't you tell me how old you were? Why didn't you tell me that you're, you know, a man or a woman? Why didn't you tell me you're whatever it is that we've, you know, why did you, I don't know, why did you make me think you were wealthy.
Right.
I don't know. What are the what
Yeah.
are the issues?
And then they
Do
fight
you guys
back.
have any that come up?
Why does it say
I keep wanting
that
to make a
you're-
long list.
Why does it say that you're 6 foot on your
Yeah, exactly.
your social media profile?
But,
Like,
yeah, just that
right.
feeling of trust and like, oh, can I trust you? Like,
And the pushback is always, well, why does that matter?
Yeah.
Why does that matter to you?
but then I guess it's like what we just it's like, well, I'm looking for signals that I can trust you, and if I'm not
Right.
getting transparency here,
Yeah.
but then and as we know, like she's not saying it because she's afraid of judgment or that she is going to be, oh yeah.
Interesting.
Why
stuff.
didn't you tell me that you
Yeah.
have herpes?
Why does it matter?
That would have
That
come
one
up
matters.
in,
Before
the
Yeah.
But I think this has been a really really interesting conversation here.
Yeah.
And maybe do you want to let us know here how we? So we're are you currently still on the kind of festival tour here, or do you have any others planned? Or
we don't
how
have
can
any
we go
planned
Okay.
at the moment, and I met some really great people, so I think
Mm-hmm.
we'll submit to some other ones, and so
Yeah,
hopefully it'll
awesome.
be
Do it.
playing again soon, and maybe even in Fargo.
Yeah, there you go.
And anyway, I don't know. I guess we'll have to keep it posted, or
Mhm.
put a link to the info when it happens. I can
Yeah, for
update you
sure.
guys, but
Yeah.
How
we'll get it
can
out
so how can is that just through Facebook, or how can they kind of follow the films of Violet's New Life?
good question. I don't know. I guess you have to follow me, and then I will update it.
Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
So yes, follow Christina.
Yeah, I guess on Instagram it's just like Cree, like CHRI. It's because my little brother, when he was born, couldn't say my whole name, so it was Cree. So it's Cree
Sweet.
Christina, and then Hepburn, Cree Hepburn on Instagram. But yeah, if you put in my name, I come up. I just feel like that's like a grounds for like there's the info. You know what I mean? I share
Yeah.
whatever's happening.
Yeah, and then we can always post it if you.
Yeah,
we'll
exactly.
follow
I'll
you,
update. That'd be so great.
We'll let you know. So, well, thank you so much for coming on and sitting through it with us.
Thank you.
So, you can find me on Twitter at LukeLarson89. You can find this podcast at L Squared Podcast on Twitter, L Squared Podcast on Instagram, at L2 Podcast on Facebook. We're on SoundCloud. We're on YouTube. And again, we just want to say thank you so much to the South Dakota Film Festival and to Tom Black and Diane Sundstrom for having us out. And we have a blast every year, and everybody's just so great. We're so honored to be part of the community. So definitely come check out the South Dakota Film Festival. Like
It
we
was
keep
amazing.
saying, it is amazing, and it's like even if you're not a filmmaker, you're just a fan. Just come out, enjoy all these great films, and like we keep saying, you'll get fed every 45 minutes.
I think there's also like
Amazing.
so much community. Like I
Big
loved
time.
talking with everyone
100%.
and meeting so many great people.
That's what we
and
always say.
talking
It's-
about the films after.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
the
people-
documentary about Dwayne Wilcox might have been my favorite with your local artist. He's not local. I
Yeah.
mean, he's South Dakota though.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's
I got
okay.
excited.
I totally agree.
I got excited.
It's great. That's what we love about it, is that everybody comes together, and it's a real, it's a real sense of community, and it's a real, I think it's a real family, and it's fun to be here where everybody is supporting each other and excited for each other, and it's just really great. So
Yes. So thank you.
Yeah,
Christina,
thank you.
for being with
Thank
us.
you.
And,
yeah, we'll see you in the next one.
see you.